Great. So thank you for the invitation to speak today. Lovely to meet you all. My name is Sophie Harding, and I'm the All Wales Consultant Pharmacist for Pharmacogenomics and Genomics, but my role mainly focuses on the implementation and support and lead-in aspects around pharmacogenomics services development in Wales, sitting beside the National Pharmacogenomics Group. So I just wanted to give an update and sort of a summary really of pharmacogenomics. So pharmacogenomics is a study of how genetic information can help predict how a patient's likely to respond to medicines. And it's just one aspect of genomics under the genomics umbrella, which is believed to have the greatest impact in the short space of time over the next few years in healthcare services. So pharmacogenomics is about bringing together the pharmacology of the drug, so how the drug works with genomic information around your DNA to ensure we're delivering safe and effective tailored medicines for our patients. At the moment, we're at the phase where we're using single gene testing, and the number of those single gene tests are increasing quite considerably and will be over the next few years. So we've currently got 14 single gene tests routinely used in practice in Wales and across the UK as the key component of genomic testing is to ensure equity for the population. So we need to ensure that we're aligned with UK developments and obviously offering these tests to patients. And I can explain a little bit more about the things that are underway a bit later on. And also with panel testing, we're quickly moving into the realms in England and Scotland of exploring under research ethics the use of a panel of genes within clinical practice in the real world. So in England, they have the Progress programme, which you may be familiar with in the northwest of England, which is exploring the use of a panel test within primary care. So a patient comes to a GP practice, is due to be prescribed one of 6 groups of medicines, and they will automatically or be offered an opportunity to consent to be part of a research study to have a panel test, which will then inform their prescribing decisions when that results come back, the prescriber that they're seeing. And that's all about all those aspects around that with regards to the digital transfer of information, stakeholders' opinions, the health economic aspects, etc. In Scotland, they've just started recruiting patients within the Phoenix study, which is a study which is exploring a pharmacogenomic panel test within secondary care. So in the hospital setting, exploring those patients that are admitted acutely or predominantly. So focusing on what that means and again, exploring all those aspects around that. And we're yet to establish our project and our approach in Wales, but we are scoping that and deciding about how we move forward with exploring what panel testing means for patients in Wales. And then moving towards this Genome UK strategy, which was published back in 2020 vision for pharmacogenomic profile to be present in a patient's electronic health record at the point of prescribing for all healthcare professionals to access. So we would look at a result as you would look at other blood results to inform prescribing decisions. And that was a 10-year vision back 5 years ago, but it probably is still 5 to 10 years away. But we are getting closer to our thoughts and decision making and our approach and our findings with regard to that vision. And it still is heavily sort of mentioned as a vision, as you will imagine, really you may have seen within the NHS England 10-year plan and the life sciences sector plan. So it still is the vision for the NHS in the UK. So pharmacogenomics can help us identify those patients who are at risk of adverse drug reactions or side effects more predominantly, and obviously that will potentially help us with regards to that we're aware that in published evidence around at least 6.5% or more of patients are admitted to hospital as a result of a side effect to their medicine, so an adverse drug reaction. The other use of pharmacogenomic testing is to identify patients who have aren't able to break down medicines, or what we call metabolized medicines, when we take them into their active form, and therefore there's gaps in how effective those medicines are for patients. And it's believed that at least 96% of patients, or more, some publications say 99% of patients have at least one change in their gene, which means that they need a change in their medication. So it is something that's potentially obviously going to impact all of us, once we move through these stages of rollout of use of different testing approaches. And also, just to mention that some evidence has already been established across Europe. A Netherlands-led study explored and concluded in 2023 the use of a pharmacogenomic panel across different healthcare settings across Europe, and we did have a study site in the UK also. The findings were that there was a reduction in adverse drug reactions or side effects by 30%, when the pharmacogenomic panel was used. And so therefore it's very much this global move away from this one size fits all approach to the right medicines at the right dose at the right time for the patient. And this is really highlighted very clearly and discussed, I think, very sort of very clearly within the personalised prescribing document, which you may be aware of, which was published back in 2023 by the British Pharmacological Society and Royal College of Physicians document, which compared really nicely in this diagram the standard approach that we're currently using with medicines use, where patients are going back and forth to their GP or in and out of hospital, with having medication changes, and doses are going up and down, and medications are being stopped because they're not tolerated. To this approach where patients are having a pharmacogenomic panel at a certain time point in their life, and then this information's been stored within their medication record, on their electronic health record, so that it can be utilised at the point of prescribing in the future. So although this sounds great and hopefully will address lots of challenges, as with everything, there's also challenges of the use of pharmacogenomic testing. So with regards to workforce aspects, we need to make sure that the workforce and the healthcare workforce in Wales and across the UK is educated to the use of pharmacogenomic testing related to their role. So not everyone has to be an expert in pharmacogenomics, but they need to have the level of understanding required to enable them to use the test within their routine practice. And also we need to make sure that we've got appropriate workforce and roles involved. So potentially pharmacogenomic leaders in some respects across Wales and different organisations to be taking forward not only the routine use of testing in practice, but also how we embed and what we call implement pharmacogenomic testing routinely in practice. So all patients benefit from it, rather than just the fact the test is available when it can be used. It needs to be used routinely. We need to also be exploring not only which genes need to be tested related to which medicines, which is work which is already underway, but also aligned with the projects I've already mentioned in England and Scotland. We need to explore what that really means for patients in practice in the real world, with regards to the use of testing, looking at patient outcome data, and other aspects of what it means for the service and how it's embedded within the service, and what the challenges are around using that test routinely across a nation. There's other aspects around digital capability, which you'll be aware of within the NHS. We have lots of systems that don't always talk to each other, and it's availability of that data to be used. And as I said, for this vision for all prescribers and healthcare professionals to be using this data, we need to enable the digital requirements and support that's needed to use that data appropriately. Also other aspects, so I won't labour them all, but other aspects around how we implement the test into practice, which is a large part of my work at the moment, and also forward thinking around the scanning on the horizon of what's coming through, what's appropriate and what's valid for practice, as we need to ensure the data is there to show benefit for patients. And also there's the raising awareness and engagement element to ensure that patients are aware and ready for these changes, as well as NHS workforce. So one really nice example to explain, which will help to illustrate this, is a pharmacogenomic test known as CYP2C19. So it sounds hard, but it's just the name of the test, the name of the gene that's responsible for making the enzyme that breaks down clopidogrel into its active form for use. So clopidogrel is a blood thinning drug often used in stroke and cardiac services. So NICE explored within a diagnostic assessment program over sort of an 18 months, 2 year period, and concluded back last July that clopidogrel CYP2C19 testing should be routine for patients who are due to receive a new prescription for clopidogrel within clinical practice. So predominantly clopidogrel is prescribed in secondary care in a hospital setting, in an acute setting. I either can be through having a mini stroke, so a TIA, or a more major stroke in certain cases. And as I said, the recommendation was that all patients that are newly starting the drug should be tested. So they compared not only whether it should be used and the cost effectiveness, but also the standard laboratory test compared to what we call a point of care test. And I would imagine you all know what that is, but just to sort of refresh everybody's memory, is at the point of the as it says on the tin, really, at the point of the test is needed, it is performed, can be performed at ward level on a machine, which gives a very quick result. So there's two approaches to obtaining this sort of gene test. The laboratory test is obviously well established, and through lots of QA processes within a laboratory setting. There's pros and cons to each approach. That does take a bit longer as opposed to a point of care test, which is a lot quicker and comes back in an hour, but it's all dependent on the ward staff to be performing that test and interpreting the results and recording the results, and all the aspects that go with a point of care testing are now coming into the genomic arena with the availability of this pharmacogenomic test. So the outcome of the recommendation was that it should be used, but the first choice is the standard laboratory test for cost reasons, as the technology for point of care testing can be very expensive and is a new sort of method and approach available. And as I said, there's challenges to that. But also second line, the recommendation is standard lab testing isn't possible, then you can use the point of care test to provide that result through different technologies. So the recommendation, as aligned with many approaches with pharmacogenomic testing, is to explore what it means in what we call a pilot or a feasibility project. As we know it's recommended, but we're just exploring what it means for practice. So to take that exploratory route and then to work towards scaling up across a nation to ensure equity. So we need to make sure the test is available for all patients, regardless of where you live. If you live in North Wales, as opposed to if you live in far west of Wales. So we set up this project back last September. It's taken some time to do with different challenges around a laboratory move and different aspects around sign off in organisations, etc. And this is a really true example of the National Pharmacogenomics Group. So myself as representing that group and a laboratory colleague working from that group also with the clinical team in UHW and representation and support for project management support from the NHS exec, or is now P&I stroke implementation network. So a real collaborative project, and we started testing in May of this year. So we've tested over 100 patients, but during setup of that project, we explore lots of aspects, and I won't read them all out, you can see them here, but it was a very robust setup of the project, and that's taken learnings from the experience that I've gained from implementing another pharmacogenomic test within cancer services back in 2020, exploring lots of aspects and themes to ensure that we're ensure the high level of safety for patients and sort of governance around the use of the test. Another example of, so just to, sorry, reflect then back on the clopidogrel position, as I said, we've tested at this sort of interim 3-month point, 105 patients were our figures last week. We've established that 30% of those patients had a change in their gene, which meant that they needed a change in their medication. So to avoid clopidogrel, and that's aligned with the national evidence for the use of the sort of incidence of this change in the gene or variant within the population. So that's aligned with what we were expecting to find. So it's quite a third of patients roughly, and that number is greater in certain ethnic groups also. It can be as much as 48% in certain ethnic groups that change in the gene is there. Another example of the use of pharmacogenomic testing and sort of exploration is underway in Wales. So we have two pilot sites or two study sites as part of another project, one in North and one in South Wales, exploring the use of mTRNR1 gene, so a pharmacogenomic gene test in neonatal services, so in newborn babies, prior to prescribing an antibiotic known as an aminoglycoside antibiotic, which is often used to needs to be used very quickly to treat a potential serious infection, and that will identify those patients that if they were to have a change in their gene and then receive that antibiotic, they would have are likely to experience hearing loss, and obviously that can be sort of have a great impact on somebody's life at such an early time. So the use of that test is obviously needs to be delivered quickly. So a point of care testing device has been already received evidence within the Manchester research group within their hospitals, and is now then went through a nice early value assessment, and they needed to the recommendation was to collect more data, and hence why they've now received Innovate UK funding to have other pilot study sites across the UK. So we've got 2 in Wales, and there's another 2 in Scotland and more in other parts of England, exploring what this test means for practice. And that's the first point of care test in use in Wales. And really a good example of the 4 nations working together, aligned with the Genome UK government strategy recommendations. Lots of people, when I give a presentation, always say, "Oh, pharmacogenetics or pharmacogenomics sounds a bit futuristic. Are we actually even doing anything?" And as I've said, we've got 4 tests which are currently used routinely now in practice and have been for some time. As you can see across the top here. So these genes are tested prior to prescribing these medicines in different specialist services. So as you see, we've got infectious disease, HIV services, oncology, and then we have hematology services. They've got a routine test. And then another, we already use the gene test for hearing loss within cystic fibrosis patients, and have been using that for some time. As you can see, the bottom is the 2 sort of projects and pilots that I've mentioned underway, which exploring the real world data and the impact. And then to the right, then at the bottom is an aspect of um, another route for where pharmacogenetic or pharmacogenomic services is coming into practice through a commercial testing pathway. So medicines which go through a nice technology appraisal. There's some medicines coming through which also require a pharmacogenomic test prior to prescribing that medicines to inform doses for patients. And therefore, another example, not just the older drugs, but the newer drugs that are coming through that require the testing requirements. There are also other tests which have been applied for to the National Test Directory, which is our commissioning route for genomic testing. And these medicines have accompanying pharmacogenomic test. And they've been signed off clinically to be implemented and added to the test directory, but we're just waiting for NHS England to add these tests to the test directory. They've had some they've just been holding back and been put on pause for a certain length of time because of the NHS resources in England and the laboratory sort of reconfiguration also. So we're just waiting to hear news on sort of next steps and sort of thinking about how we're going to implement these tests in practice. So I just wanted to give sort of an example of what's happening in Wales, but also to think of the wider picture with regards to other UK nations. So we're not the only nation taking this work forward. England has elements of this quite well established, and I've already mentioned the National Test Directory, which we also follow and is funded through JCC in Wales. So anything added to that test directory is automatically funded in Wales. Also NICE assessments, which I've already mentioned. So they're also starting to explore and assess different types of using different types of assessment, the use of pharmacogenomic testing related to medicine use. And also in England, they already have extensive networks for professional groups across England. For example, they have a network of what we call GMSA, so Genomic Medicine Service Alliances, which are working together collaboratively and covering different regions with professionals of pharmacy professionals, nursing professionals, midwifery, and medical professionals working in a multidisciplinary space to mainstream genomics in England. They also have a network of excellence in the northwest of England, which has been appointed to lead on pharmacogenomic aspects, as there's lots of work and specialist interest and leadership around pharmacogenomics in that region. And as I've already mentioned, the implementation projects that they have underway. And also there's Professor Mania Pir Mohammed is a pharmacologist and an academic who's leading in the realms of pharmacogenomics, both in the UK and internationally. And he's set up and led the CERSI Pharmacogenomic Network, which is a network across the UK to bring together how we work together on different aspects of the developments within pharmacogenomics. So with regards to education, clinical guidelines, how we get the sort of commercial companies to work with the NHS to ensure that we've got the appropriate information within information that comes out, sort of what we call SPCs, which is like the data sheet really for using a medicine. So to ensure that that medicine is sort of well documented within that information, that a pharmacogenomic test is needed and what that sort of means then for practice, etc. In Scotland, they've also been doing of recent quite a bit of work as well. So I think of real sort of key point and something which is obviously it affects us in Wales also and the other nations, is they have already undertaken the clopidogrel pilot back between 21 to 23 in Tayside, and the use of that pharmacogenomic test prior to prescribing clopidogrel in stroke is already embedded in routine practice just within that health board. But the test and the approach for CYP2C19 test with clopidogrel and also with the neonatal test has been adopted by what they're calling the ANIA pathway, which is a pathway which has been set up to explore innovations, which potential innovations to benefit the NHS and patients in Scotland. And that test is being implemented through funding from Scottish Government as a result of the assessment and the evidence that they've collected. And a part of that evidence was to undertake a Scottish health technology appraisal. In the same way that NICE have with the diagnostic assessment for clopidogrel, but they've also built in an impact assessment element and have quite powerful findings that the use of that single gene test for clopidogrel over the next 5 years is going to save NHS resources and 17.9 million NHS resources over the next 5 years and by preventing 943 secondary strokes. So there's lots of links here if you are interested in sort of finding out more about that. And there's also been assessments and work with regards to the neonatal test as well. So I just wanted to, again, sort of give you a bit of background around the UK developments, but then also to mention finally our pharmacogenomic delivery plan for Wales. So a pharmacogenomic delivery plan for Wales was requested by Welsh Government some years ago, a few years back. And the genomics delivery plan for Wales, which you'll be familiar with, was published back in 2022, which had key actions around how we develop pharmacogenomic services while establishing the National Pharmacogenomics Group, enabling the setup of my role, the role that I currently have within pharmacogenomics as the All Wales lead, and also to develop the pharmacogenomic delivery plan. The plan is to be part of a plan of plans, which sits beneath the genomics delivery plan for Wales, exploring different aspects of genomic implementation and use of testing routinely in practice. So we have a genomics research plan, which is due to be published soon, and also a genomics delivery digital plan, which is due to be published soon as well. We already have a genomic strategic workforce plan, which was published back at the end of last year. And coupled with the pharmacogenomic delivery plan, and there's also a pathogen genomic plan, the idea is that there's lots of connections between these plans to take forward different aspects around genomics, which is obviously, as you can imagine, with everything is quite complex of what needs to be developed and sort of progressed. And this also aligns with many Welsh pharmacy plans and strategies around workforce and clinical services in hospital, developing the pharmacy sort of input and involvement in NHS services. So the approach to the plan was to develop a vision. As we were aware, within the National Pharmacogenomics Group was probably where the expertise were to develop that vision for pharmacogenomics for Wales, and then to undertake an extensive engagement process. So it's meaning I've been speaking to lots of senior leaders within the NHS across Wales at all levels within healthcare, and as well as patients and the public through to various opportunities through genomics, etc. And also then to establish, so utilizing that extensive engagement to develop actions, which we've now developed, and co-authoring those actions so that key organisations can work together we can work with key organisations to progress different developments for the challenges, obviously, that we've identified for pharmacogenomics. The actions have been out for consultation, and we've pulled the draft together, and we now have a final draft of the complete plan, which will be going out for further consultation with key stakeholder organisations in the coming weeks. Again, I've mentioned a lot of this, but the plan has 9 key principles or objectives, and is going to run over the next 3 years, as we are aware that the landscape within the NHS and within genomics certainly changes very quickly. And obviously for patients to be at the forefront and centre of this plan, as well as the building of pharmacogenomic expertise in Wales. So just to give you a little sort of snippet really with regards to the vision, which again you can access and I can circulate afterwards if you're keen to read it, is about the collaboration with key stakeholders to integrate testing in practice. But it's really, really underpinned around the vision and the ambition which is shared across the UK, for pharmacogenomics to be embedded into routine practice as what we call an extra biomarker or another test that we check when we prescribe a medicine. In the same way which we would look at somebody's kidney function to see whether they can tolerate a medicine, we should be looking at a pharmacogenomic or genetic test. Um, Strategic approach then, and again, this is wordy, apologies for that, but I'll just pick up the key points, is obviously around this collaboration and sort of a multifaceted approach with key stakeholders to embed the testing in clinical practice, in current practice, not to create work for staff, but to ensure we're delivering this supporting safe and effective prescribing decisions. We need it to align with national policies and strategies. But of paramount importance, we need to make testing accessible to everyone, regardless of their background, to address the differences in patients' health across Wales, and particularly obviously within diverse and diverse populations to ensure equitable care. We know as a result of this, we need to avoid creating any health inequalities between England and Scotland and Wales. And also within Wales, across different regions in Wales, we need to ensure there's equity in how we're offering testing. And overall, looking towards this improving population health at a population health level with use of testing. So we've split the vision into immediate short term as obviously for the life of the plan, and also for the longer term vision aligned with the Genome UK strategy and other strategy visions, as you can see here. So I won't labour these, but just obviously to mention this approach really with the immediate short term of this feasibility pilot project approach, and then how we scale it up. And also to ensure there's governance and sort of appropriate routes around the plan and around the National Pharmacogenomics Group and the decision-making groups that are going to be set up as a result of the plan. And also to make steps towards this digital vision, with the first instance making the results available at the point of prescribing. And obviously scoping what support prescribers need to interpret that information. And as I said, there's 9 principles or objectives which will address many of the challenges that we've identified prior to engagement, but have further explored within the engagement phase of what's actually needed, with key actions beneath underpinning those principles or objectives. And each of those principles objectives will have a 3-year aim and a deliverable, and have outlined the benefits. And this is one specifically for patients, which you can see here, which is hence why I've put it on the slide, which is obviously really important to us to have that co-production and patient awareness element. And I'd be really keen to again discuss this further and to explore your opinion of this action, and if there's any elements you think need to be added to it or covered also. So then just to give an outline of the plan. So I think we've done this in a fairly sort of coordinated but targeted way and at pace really over the last year. We hope to publish a plan in November time. We've had news this week that we may need to do other costing work around the plan, so it may be early next year, but it will be coming within the next few months, so something definitely to watch out for. I've got some questions